If you've ever felt like your story is too raw, too risky, or too personal to put out into the world, you're not alone. So many authors sit on their God given message because they're scared of being misunderstood, losing control, really, of what you're trying to say, or just simply making what my friend and guest today, Brittany Tinsley, once called the worst decision of my entire life. I'm so thrilled to have Brittany on the show today. She's the author of Stories Our Scars Tell: Hope, Healing, and Honesty About the Wounds We Carry. It is such a beautifully written book, and it's hard to believe it's her first one as I've followed her words online since meeting her a few years ago at a coffee shop. And Brittany definitely has a way with words and is passionate about using them for good. And I couldn't wait to talk to her about how she went from writing blog posts at midnight in a panic, right, to publishing a book that's now reaching counselors, churches, and parents who desperately need someone to finally talk about what she lived through, which is self harm. You're going to hear how Brittany pushed past the fear of judgment, found the courage to release control of her story, and how she's marketing her book today. If getting your message out there feels impossible right now, ooh, you're in for a treat today. So let's get to it. Brittany, welcome to Book Marketing Mania. I'm so thrilled you're here today.
Thanks for having me.
This is so fun. Brittany, I want to first ask you in your own words, tell us about the book you wrote and who you wrote it for.
Okay, so I wrote a book called Stories Our Scars Tell, and it probably sits in the memoir, mental health, faith space. So,
Mhm.
where all of those things meet together. And it is really for anybody who has been through a season of struggle and is trying to figure out, like, where do I go from here by asking questions that really we all already sort of hold the answers to in the stories of our own lives. And so I wrote the book through my lived experience with self injury, but it's not specifically for people who have dealt with self-injury. It's for anybody who has, like I said, come out of a season of struggle and is trying to figure out, like, am I still lovable? What if I fail? Is there still hope? Things like that.
Oh, I love that so much. And I've always loved the title ever since you showed it to me. And the book cover, everything's beautiful about it, but the title just like really grabs you. And so I think that's incredible what y'all came up with there. And I love the way you talk about it like that because I think that's just the power of getting our messages out there is that, like you wrote a memoir, from your experience, which I
Mhm.
guess, a lot of our books can be that.
Mhm.
But you've also taken it a step further. So it's not just, for somebody going through this experience or, hey, let me just tell you my story. You're bringing us along through this journey and we can kind of see ourselves and where we might be getting hung up on things, that have happened in our lives. And we do have those scars, right? But I love the title. I could just go on and on about your title. So I
Thank
love the way
you.
you're sharing that message. So whenever you first got started, was there any hesitation or fear about sharing your story in a book?
Yeah, there was even before the book, there was so much fear that I had. I sort of always say that, like, I fell into this by accident. I didn't set
Mhm.
out to write a book that was about self-injury or that was really, really personal in this way. And so when I sort of started writing about this publicly, I was terrified. Like, I was
Mhm.
sure that I was making possibly the worst decision of my entire life. I thought that I mean, you were there, like, my world
Yeah.
was gonna implode, and so starting to write this and put it out in a way that I knew other people were going to be reading it and having their own interpretation of it, and even just being aware of some of the details of it was really scary, and I think the only thing that made me end up doing it was the fact that I felt compelled to show up for the people who were where I was 10 or 15 years ago
Mhm.
at this point in my journey, and I didn't necessarily think I had all the answers or something really brilliant to say necessarily, but I just knew when I was in that spot, I was searching for anybody who had anything to offer, and that
Mhm.
there was nobody talking about that sort of thing, and so I thought, "Well, I've lived this now, and so I can talk about this, and so because I can talk about it, and because I know that there are people like me out there, I should," and so
Mhm.
I took the plunge, but it was completely terrifying, and still to this day, to some degree, is terrifying every single time.
Yeah, yeah, because 'cause you're still out there talking about it, yeah, and sharing,
Yeah.
your book maybe with everybody. Well, I love that you talked about that because that was a question I was gonna ask you, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get into, like, how you first felt that calling, to share and well, basically to help, right? I mean, we share, but we help somebody is what we're being called to do, like, being able to help that person that is looking for those resources today, and you remember, like, what it was
Mhm.
like for you. And, then you take that first step of just getting your message out there. Like,
Mhm.
like you said, you weren't even thinking about a book, like some
Yeah.
people already know they're gonna write a book, but some people are like, "I don't know what I'm gonna do with this. I just know I feel called to get this message out there."
Yeah.
Um, and I think you did such a beautiful job of that. I mean, obviously it got our attention and then we were like, "You need to write a book," that just seemed like the next logical step. But it was just so genuine, the things that you shared, and you really could tell your heart in it. And I think what was so great when I look back on that is because there wasn't a book in your mind. It was just ministry, you're just
Yeah.
out there serving. And in my mind, of course, easy for me to say being a book marketer, but that's all I think it is. Like that's all you're doing. You just happen to also have a resource to offer that's packaged into a book, for somebody. But I'm curious, as you look back, Brittany, like your book came out in
Mhm.
September of 2025.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, when you think about like where you were when you were going through this struggle, and I know it's an
Mhm.
ongoing, struggle,
Yeah.
but like when you started the path of like trying to find help to get through
Yeah.
that struggle, like, from that time period to where you wrote the book, like, when you
Mhm.
started writing it, is it like I mean, I've just been thinking about this a lot lately. I'm trying to think of how I'm stumbling over my words today, but because you can write today on a platform, you started writing before your book, but you're also writing after the book, still talking
Mhm.
about this. I think that's such a great vehicle because I imagine, like, how you were feeling and the resources you were looking for and the way you can find resources at that
Mhm.
age were much different than, like, when you even just started writing the book, right?
Yeah.
So, how did that I'm not sure what I'm trying to ask you, but I'm trying to confirmation on that, and you did that change like, we can share your content, but then you're wanting to write a book to kinda consolidate it into one thing that somebody can pick up and read, and especially about such a personal struggle as this, I imagine there's some
Yeah.
things that are in the book that weren't maybe being said online.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm just thinking, like, that's the power of just keep talking about it and however
Mhm.
you're called to talk about, because then you have this book you package, but then you're still talking about it because there may be other things that you realize along the way. It's like, "Oh, now I thought of this and I didn't have it in the book, so I have to have
Yeah.
a way to talk to my people about it." Does that make sense? I guess I'm trying to ask you about just
Yeah.
kinda your journey through all that.
Yeah. So before the book, before even I was really writing publicly about this, I saw a call for blogs, for blog posts from an organization called To Write Love on Her Arms, who it's a mental health organization. And they do talk specifically about self injury. And so I thought, you know what? I'll just write a blog. I'll get it off my chest to some degree.
Mhm,
I'll just see if anybody is even interested in this. And I didn't really expect anything to happen. I submitted it like at midnight, sort of in a panic because I don't know, there was this impulse in me to do it. And I didn't hear anything for a little bit. And then eventually got an email back from their editor that they loved it. They wanted to run it. It went out to hundreds of thousands of people, on their website and in an email and on all their social media channels. And all of a sudden, this was back in 2021, 2022. Like all of a sudden, there was just this influx of people in my inbox, on my Instagram, like everywhere who were like,
mhm,
"We've never heard anybody talk about this from this Christian perspective, from the perspective of somebody who's like lived through it and is willing to talk about how God and faith interact with a struggle like this." And that really was the moment where I was like, "Oh, maybe there's something more here." And so I sort of baby stepped my way into it. And as doors opened, I mean, I was scared every single time, and I remember, like, praying and thinking, like, "I'm just gonna say yes. Whatever the
mhm,
opportunities are that are presented to me, I'm not necessarily gonna seek them out, but I'll say yes to them." And
mhm,
so I just started saying yes, and that initial blog post turned into other articles, turned into podcast appearances, eventually turned into a book proposal and then the book, but none of that would have happened if there hadn't sort of been that initial conversation in the form of this blog and then the response to that. And so now, yes, there's stuff in the book that I hadn't shared publicly before, online, but to your point, like I'm still writing in that space, and the book was never meant to be a one and done. Here's this like perfectly packaged
mhm,
sort of answer or guidebook or anything. It's like, here's this snapshot of where I am right now and what I have
mhm,
to offer right now. but you don't know what you don't know
Yeah.
until you know it later, and so as I'm still writing publicly to the audience that was built, 5 years ago and also to the
Uh-huh.
audience that's found me since then, it's like, here's the continuation of this. Here's the book is the snapshot, and now here's the continuation of what I'm still living out and what I'm still learning, and I'm gonna bring you along with me because the whole point of this is to sort of do it in a public way, an
Mhm.
appropriately public way, so that
Yeah.
hopefully you can find some truth in it for yourself. Like, your journey doesn't have to look like mine. You don't have to come to the same conclusions that I come to, but we're all doing it together. And
Mhm.
so the book is a packaged piece of that, but there's still more before and after that exists out there sort of in perpetuity for people to find and to use in whatever way they find helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so beautiful because I think we have to all remember it's a journey, right? I mean, it is. It's just this ongoing journey. And, if we all figured it all out, then, we wouldn't be writing any more books or any more blog posts,
Yeah.
right? We wouldn't need the help at all. But I think yeah, that's so good to say, like, to think about like how you are producing content and, you learn new things and now you want to share it. Because I was thinking about, especially for self harm, like, all the mom podcasters, and I have a lot of moms, that podcast that are listening and writing books, for moms.
Mhm.
But I was just thinking, like, even just a couple of years ago, how they might have tackled this topic, is probably really different than maybe how they would talk to their kids about it today, just because there is so much, in our kids' faces, right? And so many ways they think they can solve,
Yeah.
their mental health struggles. And so, anyway, this is just kind of a shout out. Anybody wants to have Brittany on her show, like, I highly recommend because I think it's, you're much younger and you have a different perspective on things. And you could probably talk to a younger audience, that we may serve the moms, somebody at my age
Yeah.
may serve the mom, but we need somebody to come in and really talk about the younger generation. And, I know you continue to work and serve the younger generation as well as being a mom yourself. So, um, anyway, I could go off on a tangent. Obviously, I already have on a tangent on all that. So if you could kind of sum up, like Brittany, like once you knew, like, hey, have a fear of, getting out and just blogging about it, much less,
Yeah.
putting together a book about it, like what is the number one thing that really helps you kind of get over that?
I think, well, 1, therapy, a lot of
Mhm.
therapy. But 2, I think that I just had to decide not to be so precious about it. Like, I
Mhm.
think that sometimes, at least for me, I have a tendency to think that anything in my life, regardless of how serious it is like gonna be misunderstood, and I have to explain it in just the right way, and I need to be really in control of the narrative and that sort of line of thinking, and that
Mhm.
doesn't work when you're putting a book out into the world because, like, you only have control while you're sitting at your desk typing it, and beyond that, even in the editing process, you don't necessarily have, full
Mhm.
control over it anymore, and so I think that getting to a place where it felt comfortable enough to release some of that is what enabled me to write it. I always talk about, um she's a fabulous writer and therapist. Her name's Andi Kolber,
Mhm.
and she's written several books, but, I heard her do a talk once, and she talked about, like, having 1 foot firmly planted in your window of tolerance and 1 outside of it, and so her advice
Ooh.
was, if you're going to write about something publicly or share something publicly that's maybe difficult, it's okay for it to be uncomfortable. It doesn't ever have to be totally comfortable for you to do it. Being uncomfortable isn't inherently a sign that something is bad or wrong. But you do need to have 1 foot firmly planted within your window of tolerance, whatever that is, so that as you're writing about whatever you're writing about, you're not sort of veering into a territory that is unmanageable for you on a personal level. And so
Mhm.
as I was writing and as I was thinking about writing and once the book was written and I was thinking about it going out into the world, I've tried to frame everything through that lens. Like,
Mhm.
am I saying yes to things that are keeping me in a space where I have 1 foot in a window of tolerance? Or is saying yes to this gonna push me all the way out? And if saying yes is
Mhm.
gonna push me all the way out, then I can't do it. And if
Yeah.
it's keeping me in a window of tolerance, 1 foot there, then I can say yes and know that it might be uncomfortable and it might make me nervous and there might be a result that I didn't anticipate or, all of the
Yeah.
unknowns. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, it's gonna be okay because I've got 1 foot firmly planted here. And
Uh-huh.
so I think that looking at sort of the whole process through that lens made me brave enough to actually do it because it stopped feeling like, okay, I have to feel totally good and secure and comfortable in this. And it gave me room, I think, to be a little nervous about it and for that to be okay.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. I'm gonna have to go find all my Andy Cover books and find that to refresh my memory. But yeah, that made that just like hit me on so many levels of things like I've thought about writing about, but I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I'm not quite, 100% through this, and so who am I to write
Yeah.
a book about it?" But, yeah, I think God, just spoke to me something that through you, Brittany, that I needed to hear. Okay, so let's talk about, the flip side of writing about something hard. Let's just talk about how you're marketing your book. So, as I said,
Okay.
we connected on Podmatch, which is super fun because
Yeah.
Brittany's always been on my list to invite on the show, and I just hadn't done it. So, thank God Podmatch did it for me, and took care of that. So let's talk about, what you're doing to get your message out there. And I know Podmatch is one of the things you're certainly doing. So share any of
Yeah.
those things with us.
Yeah, I think Podmatch is great. It's a fun resource to connect you with, podcasters that you and I do know each other personally, but most of them that I found there I don't know personally, and so that's been a fun way to have new conversations. But I think that before the book came out, my really main and only focus was y- both social media channels, Instagram and the like that go along with it, and my Substack. I write a weekly Substack, and so grew my audience there and had really pushed all of the marketing through those mostly Instagram and Substack, those 2 channels. Um, and that's been great, and it was effective in reaching the audience that I already had, and what I have learned, as a first-time author putting a book out into the world is that that's all well and good and has a place, but also you can't only do that, and so, I've done a couple of book signings, and those have been really fun to get to be, like, with actual readers,
Mhm.
but mostly at this point, here, what are we, 6, 8 months out from the book coming out, most of the marketing that I've done has been in-person speaking engagements and getting into places and sharing. Usually they want me to come in and talk about faith and mental health or self-injury specifically, and getting in and sharing more about the message of the book than about the book itself, and
Mhm.
then letting obviously people then go and buy the book as sort of a byproduct of hearing the message. And so that's been effective in terms of marketing, but also just a fun thing on a personal level because again, writing is so solitary, and so it's fun to get to actually be in a room with people and talk face to face with them and have real conversations about the things that matter. And so I think the in-person marketing has actually probably been the most effective thing for me post book release
Uh-huh.
in terms of like practical sales and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Are you speaking to faith-based audiences or secular audiences too?
It's been some of both. Yeah, it's
Okay.
been like churches and ministries, like Celebrate Recovery type ministries, things like
Mhm.
that. But also like school counselors.
Mhm.
Anybody who is dealing with like a teen or young adult population feels a pretty distinct lack of resources. A friend of mine and I started a gathering that we're doing called Held Even Here, and she and I met with a group of counseling associates the other
Uh-huh.
day and got to speak as like a continuing education thing for, I don't know, 20 or 25 within this practice of these counselors. And so that was really neat, but a secular audience.
Uh-huh.
So it's been some of both. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love that so much. Well, that's what I was thinking. I think that's the fun thing about Podmatch is well, I think the fun thing about Podmatch period is like it just makes it easy, right? And it'll match
Yeah.
me up with podcasters. But it really gets you out of your normal, like you were saying, you can reach your people, but then you got to get out and reach more people, and share
Hmm.
the message with new audiences that you don't know. And I think that's, definitely the beauty of Podmatch. But even to tag on to that, even more so like someone in your boat is there's so many podcasts that are serving like what you just a few audiences you mentioned. There's
Yeah.
podcasts that are just serving those audiences, and they may not be faith-based podcasts, but
Hmm.
they're serving the audience that needs your message. And so I know
Yeah.
you could easily share to a faith-based audience, or you could share to one that's not talking about faith, even though faith is in your book
Yeah.
and everything. But I think that's such the cool thing about it is there's so many ways to reach people, but I think that's a super fun that may be the whole purpose of using Podmatch is that's your intention is
Yeah.
just to try to get in front of these other audiences that you may not be doing on your own or through your publisher if
Hmm.
you have somebody working with you. So, well, that's so great. So let me ask you two things. So, Brittany, like if they were thinking about speaking, like have these all been local or these have been virtual speaking events?
They've been local, yeah. Well,
Okay.
I've done a couple virtual, but the ones recently have been local, yeah.
Okay. What would be like the number one tip you would share with somebody if they're just thinking, I want to start speaking locally and serving audiences that way?
Start having a lot of conversations and don't be afraid to follow up. I think that
Yeah.
we tend to be, at least for me, I
Uh-huh.
get really great ideas and I think, yes, this is going to be a solid connection and this makes a lot of sense for me and for also this audience. But people are busy and it's
Mhm.
sometimes hard to get in front of people or hard to get a response to an email. And I don't like to bother people or feel like I'm bothering people, and so I tend to be like, "Okay, well, I sent the email, I did the thing, and so now I'm waiting for a response." But in almost every case, there's had to be some degree of like, "Okay, I'm gonna follow up, and I'm gonna follow up again," and that is uncomfortable for me and not necessarily in my nature, and so I think that
Mhm.
if you're, like, serious about wanting to get in front of people, you have to be willing to follow up with people who maybe aren't just responding initially right off the bat, but also on, like, a practical level, like, have a one sheet that you're sending out. Have something that's really clear, like, who you are and what your message is and why you fit their audience and why they should care about you because people are getting pitches, all
Mhm.
the time, and so you have to make sure they understand why they should bring you in or what value you bring to them that they can't find anywhere else. Yeah, I think that those would be
Yeah,
my 2 main
that's
things.
super important. What about for Podmatch? So if somebody's considering, how did you first hear about Podmatch? Let me ask you that too.
Um, I don't actually remember. I feel like maybe you told me about it at some point. I don't know. I don't fully remember, honestly.
Yeah.
But,
It
yeah, it's been a great resource for me to find people that I didn't know existed and podcasts that I didn't know existed, and so I think there that, like, it obviously, I guess for people who don't know, it gives you matches,
Uh-huh.
that, you align with on some level, and so I think that in that space, it's important for me as somebody who's going through and, like, sorting these out or trying to find my own matches or whatever, to consider maybe groups or podcasts or people who aren't necessarily an automatic easy fit,
Uh-huh.
because I think that I go, "Oh, well, they're not faith-based," or, "Oh, they're not talking about mental health," or, "Oh, they're not," whatever those sort of big categories are, and I, in some ways, dismiss it.
Mhm.
And then I go, "Well, wait, actually, like, this is a parenting podcast. Parents care
Mhm.
about self-injury. They might not necessarily, care about the faith element, but they care about
Mhm.
their teenager or, this is a health podcast. Like
Mhm.
mental health is still part of health. Like there's an avenue here. And so I think that a lot of the stories that we're telling, regardless of what they are, fit into a lot of different categories that maybe we don't necessarily see ourselves like right off the bat. And so I think giving myself permission to sort of branch out into areas where I wouldn't necessarily say my expertise lies, but where the story still fits,
Mhm.
has opened up a lot of doors that I wouldn't have necessarily otherwise walked through.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so good because, yeah, you never know who's listening, and I listen to a lot of podcasts, but lots of
Mhm.
genres of podcasting, so you just never know, um you might come in, bring up a topic somebody didn't even think about, or
Yeah.
they are thinking about it, but, this is where they're getting their information. So, there's always somebody in that audience probably that needs that message. So that's so good. Well, thanks, Brittany. This has been so amazing. I'm going to be sure and put the links to your book, Stories Are Scars Tell, because I really hope that, everybody will check it out. Or, if you know somebody that's going through the particular struggles that Brittany writes about, or, how to get through other struggles and use some of the, principles she has in her book, maybe you would pass it along to a friend or a loved one. That'd be amazing. So thanks, Brittany, for your time today. I so appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, I just love Brittany's heart, and I can't stop thinking about her story around learning her window of tolerance when sharing her message. So this week, think about one piece of your story or your message that you've been holding back and ask yourself honestly, do I have one foot on solid ground here? And if the answer is yes, that might be your permission to take the next step and start writing or sharing it with those that are meant to hear it, even if it feels a little scary. Oh, my heart needed to hear that today. I hope you'll check out Brittany's book, Stories Our Scars Tell, at the link in the show notes for yourself or for someone you care about. And let's continue this conversation about sharing our stories in the next episode. My guest, Heather O'Brien, author of No Fear Allowed and host of the Heal with God podcast, is joining me, and she's sharing one way to get your readers and listeners to trust you faster so they buy into your message sooner. I can't wait. Thanks for tuning into Book Marketing Mania today. And as always, I'll be there for you next episode to help you reach and serve your readers one podcast at a time. See you then.